The champagne fountain sparkled under crystal chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Plaza Hotel, casting prismatic light across 500 guests dressed in their finest. Jessica Morgan stood near the dessert table, her ivory gown flowing around her like sea foam, watching her new husband Michael across the room. He was laughing with his college friends, his hand gestures animated, his face flushed with champagne and confidence. She didn't hear the exact words at first. The orchestra was playing something classical, strings swelling through the air, and conversations hummed like static around her. But she saw his friends glance her way, saw their expressions shift from amusement to something uncomfortable. One of them, Brian, she thought his name was, tried to pull Michael away toward the bar. Jessica moved closer, her heels silent on the plush carpet. "Come on, man," Michael was saying, his voice carrying now that she was within earshot. "I mean, I love her, but look at her. My wife's shaped like a goddamn pig. Been stress-eating since we got engaged." The words hit like ice water. Jessica stopped moving, stopped breathing. The dessert plate in her hand tilted dangerously. "Dude, keep your voice down," Brian hissed, his eyes darting around the room. Michael waved him off. "Everyone's thinking it. Did you see her in that dress? I specifically told her to lose 15 pounds before today." 15. Instead, she probably gained 5. Fat pig couldn't even do that for our wedding day. Jessica's vision tunneled. The ballroom seemed to contract around her, sound becoming muffled and distant. She'd spent months planning this wedding. Months working with caterers and florists and the wedding planner Michael's mother had insisted they hire. She'd chosen this dress because Michael said he loved it, had stood through 3 fittings while the seamstress pinned and adjusted. She turned slowly, her movements mechanical, and walked toward the bride's suite adjacent to the ballroom. Her maid of honor, Claire, looked up from her phone as Jessica entered. "Jess, what's wrong? You're white as a ghost." Jessica set down her plate with trembling hands. "Michael just called me a fat pig, to his friends, at our wedding reception." Claire's mouth fell open. "He what?" "He told them I couldn't even lose 15 pounds for our wedding day, that everyone's thinking it." Jessica's voice was flat, emotionless. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder. "That absolute piece of—" Claire stood up, her face reddening. "Where is he? I'm going to—" "No." Jessica held up a hand. "Not yet." She moved to the suite's vanity, staring at her reflection. The professional makeup hid the pallor of her skin, the carefully styled hair still perfect despite the hours that had passed since the ceremony. She looked beautiful. She knew she looked beautiful. Michael had told her so when he'd first seen her walking down the aisle just 4 hours ago. 4 hours married, and already he was tearing her apart to his friends. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A text from her father. "Everything okay, sweetheart? You looked upset." Robert Sullivan had always been perceptive. Even from across a crowded ballroom, he'd noticed something wrong with his daughter. Jessica stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Her father was a problem Michael didn't know he had. When Jessica had met Michael 18 months ago at a charity gala, she'd been careful. She'd learned early in life that money changed how people treated you, changed what they wanted from you. So she'd introduced herself simply as Jessica Morgan, using her mother's maiden name. She'd told Michael she worked in investments and consulting, which was technically true. She sat on the boards of 3 major corporations and managed a private equity portfolio worth approximately $300 million. Michael worked in pharmaceutical sales. He made good money, maybe $150,000 a year, and he was proud of it. He'd grown up solidly middle class in suburban Connecticut, gone to a state school, worked his way up in his company. Jessica had found his normalcy refreshing, after years of dating men who immediately calculated her net worth before asking her name. She'd kept the truth from him, told herself it was to see if he'd love her for herself, not her money. Now, standing in the bride's suite with his cruel words echoing in her mind, she wondered if she'd been lying to herself all along. "Jess," Claire touched her shoulder. "Talk to me." Jessica turned from the mirror. "Michael doesn't know who I really am." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" "He thinks I'm comfortable, maybe upper middle class. He has no idea about my father, about the money, about any of it." "Wait." Claire's eyes widened. "He doesn't know you're Robert Sullivan's daughter." "The Robert Sullivan. I use my mother's name for privacy. I told Michael my father was in business. He never asked for details." "And now?" Jessica picked up her phone again, reading her father's text. Robert Sullivan was a legend in American business. He'd built his fortune from nothing, starting with a single hardware store in rural Pennsylvania, and expanding into a nationwide chain before diversifying into real estate, technology investments, and manufacturing. Forbes estimated his wealth at somewhere north of $8 billion. He was famously protective of his only daughter. Michael had met him twice. Both times Robert had introduced himself simply as Robert, dressed casually, asked Michael thoughtful questions about his work. Michael had found him friendly but forgettable, just another wedding guest, Jessica's dad, a guy who probably owned a small business somewhere. He had no idea he'd married into one of the wealthiest families in America. Jessica's fingers moved across her phone screen. "Can you come to the bride's suite? I need to talk to you." The response was immediate. "On my way." Claire paced the small suite. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell my father what Michael said, and then I'm going to let him decide what happens next." "Jess, your dad is pretty protective. Are you sure?" Jessica met her friend's eyes. "Michael just humiliated me at my own wedding, called me a fat pig to his friends. Do you know what that tells me, Claire? It tells me this is who he really is. This is what he thinks when he looks at me. And if this is day 1 of our marriage, what happens on day 100, day 1000? The door opened and Robert Sullivan entered, his distinguished face creased with concern. At 65, he was still imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He'd built his empire through shrewd observation and decisive action. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Jessica gestured for Claire to leave. Her maid of honor squeezed her hand once before slipping out, closing the door behind her. "Dad," Jessica began, and her voice cracked. All the composure she'd maintained shattered. "Michael called me a fat pig. Just now, at the reception. He told his friends, everyone's thinking it, that I couldn't even lose 15 pounds for our wedding day." Robert's expression went from concerned to stone cold in seconds. He said, "What?" "I heard him, Dad. I was standing right there." Jessica felt tears threatening, fought them back. "He married me 4 hours ago, and he's already tearing me apart to his friends." Her father was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Does he know? About your real identity, the money?" "No. He thinks I'm comfortable, but nothing special. He has no idea who you really are." Robert moved to the window overlooking the ballroom below. Jessica could see him processing, calculating. This was the man who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, who'd faced down hostile takeovers and market crashes without flinching. "Where is he now?" Robert asked. "Probably still with his friends by the bar." "And his father? Where's Thomas?" Jessica understood immediately. Michael's father, Thomas Henderson, was here with his wife, sitting at one of the head tables. Thomas was a regional manager for a retail chain, proud of his son's success, thrilled about the wedding. He had no idea what his son had just said about his new daughter-in-law. "You're going to tell him," Jessica said. It wasn't a question. Robert turned from the window. "I'm going to do more than that, but first I need you to understand something, Jessica. What happens next changes everything. Your marriage, your life, Michael's life. Are you certain this is what you want?" Jessica thought about the man she'd fallen in love with, or thought she'd fallen in love with. The charming pharmaceutical sales rep who'd made her laugh, who'd seemed so genuine, so different from the fortune hunters she usually encountered. Had that man ever existed? Or had he always been this person, the one who called his wife a fat pig at their own wedding reception? "I'm certain," she said. Robert nodded once, decisive. "Then let's go." They left the bride's suite together, father and daughter, and descended to the ballroom floor. The party was in full swing now, guests dancing, the band playing something upbeat. Jessica spotted Michael immediately. He'd moved from the bar to a cluster of tables where his groomsmen had gathered. He was still laughing, still animated, oblivious. Thomas Henderson sat 3 tables away with Michael's mother, Patricia. Robert steered Jessica in that direction. "Thomas," Robert said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Patricia, could I have a word?" Michael's parents stood immediately, smiling. "Of course," Thomas said. "What a wonderful celebration. Thank you again for hosting at this incredible venue." Robert's expression didn't change. "I think we should speak privately. Jessica, would you join us?" They moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the river. The music was distant here, conversations muted. "Is something wrong?" Patricia asked, her smile fading. Robert looked at Jessica. She took a breath and repeated what she'd heard, every word Michael had said. Thomas's face went from confusion to shock to fury. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. "That's impossible," Thomas said. "Michael wouldn't. He loves Jessica." I was standing 10 feet away. Jessica said quietly. I heard every word. Patricia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Jessica, oh honey, I'm so sorry. Thomas looked like he might be sick. Where is he? With his friends, Robert said. But before you confront him, Thomas, there's something else you should know, something Michael doesn't know. He explained briefly and efficiently exactly who he was. Watch the color drain from Thomas's face as the implications sank in. You're that Robert Sullivan, Thomas said weakly. The billionaire. Yes, which means Michael didn't just insult his wife at their wedding reception. He insulted the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in America, a man who could, if he chose, make life very difficult for everyone in the Henderson family. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Jessica watched her father, saw the cold calculation in his eyes. This was Robert Sullivan in business mode, and it was terrifying to witness. What do you want? Thomas asked. I want my daughter to be treated with respect, Robert said. What happens next is up to her. All eyes turned to Jessica. She looked across the ballroom at Michael, still laughing with his friends, still completely unaware that his world was about to implode. I want everyone to know, she said. I want him to understand exactly what he's lost. Robert nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll do. He pulled out his phone, made a brief call. Within minutes, the band stopped playing. The DJ, a professional Robert had personally vetted, took over the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, the DJ announced, if I could have your attention, please, the father of the bride would like to say a few words. The ballroom quieted, 500 guests turning their attention to the small stage where the band had been playing. Robert ascended the steps, taking the microphone with practiced ease. He'd given countless speeches, testified before Congress, addressed shareholders and employees and journalists, but this was different. This was personal. Thank you all for being here today, Robert began, his voice warm and charming. It's been a beautiful celebration of love, and I'm grateful to share it with all of you. Most of you know me simply as Robert, Jessica's father, but I think it's time I introduced myself properly. He paused, letting the moment build. Jessica watched Michael's face from across the room. He was frowning, confused about why her father was making a speech. My full name is Robert Sullivan. Some of you may recognize that name. I'm the founder and CEO of Sullivan Enterprises, with holdings in retail, technology, real estate, and manufacturing across the country. A murmur went through the crowd. People were pulling out phones, Googling, confirming what they were hearing. My daughter Jessica is my only child and the sole heir to my estate, which Forbes recently valued at approximately $8 billion. The murmur became a roar. Michael had gone white, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his mouth. Around him, his friends were staring, equally shocked. Robert continued, his voice hardening. Jessica chose to keep this information private when she met Michael. She wanted to be loved for herself, not her money. And I respected that choice, but approximately 15 minutes ago, my daughter overheard her husband of 4 hours, call her a fat pig to his friends. He told them she couldn't even lose 15 pounds for their wedding day, that everyone was thinking it. The ballroom had gone silent. Jessica could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. So I think it's time Michael understood exactly who he married, Robert said, and what he's thrown away with his cruel, thoughtless words. He handed the microphone back to the DJ and descended from the stage. The silence held for another beat, then exploded into chaos. Guests were talking, pointing, staring at Michael, who stood frozen in the center of the ballroom like a statue. Jessica walked toward him, Robert at her side. People parted before them like a wave. When she reached Michael, she looked up at his ashen face. Jessica, he whispered, you never what? She asked quietly. Never meant for me to hear? Never thought I'd find out what you really think of me? It was a joke, he said desperately. The guys were giving me a hard time and You called your wife a fat pig at your wedding reception, Robert said, his voice like ice. There's no joke in that, son. Michael's father appeared at his elbow, his face thunderous. We're leaving, Thomas said, right now. Dad, I can explain. You can't explain anything, Thomas snapped. You've humiliated yourself, your wife, and our entire family. We're leaving before you make this any worse. Patricia was crying openly now, trying to apologize to Jessica, who stood silent and still in her wedding gown. Around them, guests were recording on their phones, posting to social media, spreading the story across the internet in real time. Michael tried one more time, reaching for Jessica's hand. Please, let me apologize properly. Let me make this right. Jessica pulled away. You can't make this right, Michael. You showed me exactly who you are today, and I believe you. She turned to her father. I want to leave. Robert nodded. The car's waiting. They walked through the ballroom together, 500 pairs of eyes following their progress. Jessica held her head high, her father's hand steady on her arm. Behind them, she could hear Michael calling her name, hear Patricia's sobs, hear the explosion of conversations erupting in their wake. The hotel lobby was blessedly quiet. Robert's driver had the car ready at the entrance, door open. Jessica climbed in, her wedding gown pooling around her like a cloud. Where to? Robert asked gently. Home, Jessica said. Your home. They drove through the city in silence, leaving the Riverside Plaza Hotel behind. Jessica watched the buildings slide past, processing everything that had happened in the span of an hour. She'd gotten married. She'd heard her husband insult her to his friends. She'd revealed her true identity to 500 people. She'd walked out on her own wedding reception. Her phone was exploding with notifications, texts, calls, social media alerts. The story was already trending. Billionaire heiress exposes cruel husband at wedding reception was the headline that kept appearing. Claire had texted, OMG, are you okay? That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. Jessica's lawyer had called twice. Michael had sent 17 texts, each more desperate than the last. She turned off her phone. You did the right thing, Robert said quietly. Did I? Jessica looked at her father. I just destroyed his life. He destroyed it himself, Robert said firmly. You just made sure there were consequences. They pulled up to Robert's estate, 20 acres in Connecticut, the house Jessica had grown up in. Her old bedroom was still preserved exactly as she'd left it before college. She would sleep there tonight, in her childhood bed, still wearing her wedding gown. The absurdity of it hit her all at once, and she started laughing. It was either that or cry, and she was done crying over Michael Henderson. Robert looked concerned. Sweetheart, I'm okay, Jessica said, wiping her eyes. I'm actually okay. And she was. Shocked, hurt, angry, but fundamentally okay. Because she'd learned something valuable today. She'd rather be alone than be with someone who would tear her down the moment her back was turned. Over the following weeks, the story exploded. Media outlets picked it up, dissecting every detail. Michael's employer quietly let him go. Apparently, pharmaceutical companies didn't appreciate their sales reps becoming infamous for insulting their wealthy spouses. His friends stopped returning his calls. His social media accounts were flooded with criticism. Jessica filed for an annulment on the grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. Her lawyers argued that Michael had married her under false pretenses, presenting himself as loving and supportive while harboring cruel, contemptuous views. The annulment was granted within 6 weeks. Thomas and Patricia Henderson reached out to apologize, mortified by their son's behavior. Jessica accepted their apology graciously. They were good people who'd raised a son who made terrible choices. That wasn't their fault. Michael tried to contact her repeatedly, through friends, through lawyers, through carefully worded public statements. Jessica ignored all of it. She'd said everything that needed to be said that day in the ballroom. 3 months after the wedding, Jessica attended a charity gala, the same one where she'd met Michael 18 months earlier. This time she went as herself, Jessica Sullivan, daughter of Robert Sullivan, businesswoman and philanthropist in her own right. She met someone new that night, someone who knew exactly who she was from the beginning, who valued her mind as much as her money, who never once commented on her appearance except to tell her she looked beautiful, and meant it. But that was later. First, she had to learn to trust again, had to rebuild herself after Michael's words had tried to tear her down. It took time, therapy, and the unwavering support of her father and friends. The wedding dress hung in her closet for months, a reminder of the worst day of her life. Eventually, she donated it to a charity that provided wedding gowns to brides who couldn't afford them. Someone else could make happy memories in it. Her own memories were complicated enough. A year after the wedding, Jessica received one final message from Michael, a simple text. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know I'm sorry. She stared at the message for a long time before responding with just 2 words, I know. Then she deleted his number and moved on with her life, the life she'd reclaimed that day in the ballroom when she'd chosen truth over silence, consequences over comfort, and herself over a marriage that had been poisoned from the start. The timing had been perfect after all. The truth had arrived exactly when it needed to, just in time to save her from a lifetime of cruelty disguised as love. And for that, Jessica was grateful.